Alrighty, so welcome to week 14 in JavaScript. So in week 14, we make our last major concept change for the course. So we've ended form validation, although I would say definitely could do more. The importance of form validation I've talked about in that content, but just to reiterate, where we ended gives you the basics. And I know in some of the conversations I've had and some of the form and some of the submissions, I've had conversations specifically in this case with Paul, because Paul was saying, and I think this is good to think about, is that when we're doing the form validation, using that scroll to positioning like we do on the edit to actually go to the item that's in error is a great idea. And what I realized today, as I looked at last week, that's actually where I was a bit conflicted about doing more content around form validation. But here's what I would say, that's a fun thing to actually play on. And what you get from a class like this is exposed to concepts that then, based on your interest level, your goals, you would then take to the next level. Okay. So, just to say that we are going to, at this point, step away after the step 5, we move into week 14. And we are going to have you implement form validation in your decision app, but it will not be done. And I'm just going to scroll through until the end of week 16. You will start on, sorry, it was 16, you'll start on coding it. But you could already think about that fact that, just know that you're going to need to have written 2 custom form validations for your decision app. So you could have already been thinking about it before we get to this place. Okay. And then what will happen in the last week is you will share out your final step 6 with your form validation for everyone to check out. So that's just to say we're wrapping, at least for now, our coverage of form validation, moving on to our last major concept, which is writing asynchronous JavaScript. We have actually already written some asynchronous JavaScript, and you'll get reminded about that in the graded part of this work. But just to give you where we're heading, is we're going to actually implement into our carbon footprint to first get the user location. And now we'll actually use something built into the browser. It is also an API function. And when we talk about API functions, what we're doing is instead of writing code that is sequential, meaning we just execute one line and the next, this is actually writing code that actually goes out or gets user input and waits for the user to respond. Or in this case, gets user input, makes another call, and then responds back. So your code has to be able to wait. Okay, so this is an important part is you say, okay, go call this API endpoint, wait, because it definitely takes time for something to happen. Like when we're writing synchronous code, it's like you click, something happens. And by the way, we could talk about how the click is actually async code, even though at this point it may not feel like it because you don't have a feeling, unless you already have come in with it, about what async code is. So let me just show you, okay? So as an example, once we finish week 16, you're going to implement this particular new section, which is your error quality index. And so right now, there's been a API call to the navigator. And what it's asking, in this case, it's waiting for user input. Okay. So once I tell it, because I'm guessing you all have been to a website where it asks you, hey, want to know your location? And you can say never allow, like, I don't want the whatever this is knowing my location, or you might want it to. Right. So oftentimes, especially if I'm looking on a website where I'm looking for maybe a store location, I'm like, yeah, I'll let you know what my location is so you can tell me the closest thing to me. So this is a very common thing, but this is asynchronous. It's having to wait. My code is waiting for the user to do something. And then once I do something, which in this case is I'm going to allow it, then my code is going to go out to this site, which we're going to actually have you set up this week in this attendance to get an API key. Again, I'm just introducing you to terms that you're going to see. That once you allow, okay, then it actually goes out and it grabs your lat and long. Okay, these are your coordinates for your location. And then it then takes that and goes to the Open Weather API and gives us the air quality. Okay. So, and I have a message here that I have based on the air quality given some output too. Okay. So you can see how first we waited for the user to say, yes, we'll allow you to know our Latin long. And you didn't see this in the code. I'm just giving you this as the example. And then what happens is we use that, if the user allows us, to then make the call, the API call. Again, both of these are actually API calls to return to us that AQI, that air quality index. So it can be a little confusing when you're going through this content when you hear AQI, but you're like, what's an API? So this is just air quality index. The API is actually what you're using to get your calling an endpoint. Okay. So ultimately, at the end of our code along for week 16, this is where we end up. Okay. Now, along the way, we're going to have you get an API key. We're going to show you how to secure that API key to where it doesn't get pushed to GitHub, because pushing it to GitHub opens that API key up to other people using it. Now, it's a relatively small exposure for a class like this because you can also reissue an API key, but it's just good to know how to do it. The way I've done it in this course, is actually, I would say, one way. It's not the best way, but given our configuration, it works. But I just wanted to start with giving you, like, we're moving on. Here's where we're going. Now, let's talk about this week and what we're doing, because I'm actually, and let me click into week 14 to actually talk about this. And I will come back to this one. But in this case, I've talked about the decision app, where we're going to end up doing it. We've talked about form validation a little bit, and where, yeah, so much more to learn. Okay. And then what you're going to end up doing for part of the setup, I'm going to suggest you do it here in preparation for something coming, is actually to get that API key. Okay. So let me walk you through that, and then I'll come back to this idea of the code challenge. So here is the website for what you want to sign up for. Okay. And then it says, get your API key. So why do you need an API key? Is that these sites offer a service and they want to be able to track how much you're using that service. And in this case, Open Weather allows you to use it for free. But they still want to know, because at certain points of usage, which we will not hit in any sense, right? It's free, but once you hit that usage, it would possibly become, based on your particular use case, a paid thing, and they just want to know when you hit that. And really, they're just tracking the usage, right? Now, what gets a little bit tricky here is when it says get your API key. It's actually going to take you, and in my case, because I had already had it, right? But what you're going to want to do, and let me just stop here and go back, what you're going to want to do is view pricing. Okay, so when you do view pricing, you might think, well, I don't want you to pay for this, but this is part of what websites earn their money, to make people think they have to actually sign up for what they do offer as free. I don't say that's a bad thing. It's more just understanding how to choose the right plan. So let's actually do that. So choose plan, and what it makes it look like is that this is the only one you have access to if you don't go searching. So I'm going to scroll down and realize, oh, wow, there's actually different levels here. I have a startup level, developer, professional, expert. All of these are cost. But here's the deal. You scroll down even further, you start to see that there actually are even more history, these costs, right? Go down even further, we start to see, oh, wait a minute. Now, let's go back further. Now I can see there's free, right? I wish I had a link I could provide you, but I have provided you at least a link to that sign up where I got started this pricing. Okay. Now, last time I signed up for this, I didn't see free for students. I just used free for everyone because it had everything I needed, which is basically the air pollution one. But if you wanted to play around, you could also, I think, sign up for this one. You could give it a try if you wanted to, but for sure subscribe to this one. So what you're going to do here is you're actually going to create an account, right? You have to agree to it, and then it'll create the account. Okay, and then once you do that, it'll actually walk you through the process, but you'll actually go through and create that API key. Okay, let me go ahead and log into my account, just so, because I'm not going to show you my API key. You would go to API keys. Matter of fact, let me pause and just verify this because I also don't necessarily want to expose my API key because it's a privacy issue to everybody. Yeah, so once you log on to the site, then you actually go to the API and it just says generate, and you'll get that particular. And I think I do this again when you actually walk through and use the set up the API key, which I think we'll need starting next week. But this week we actually just set up the structure. But I'm just telling you now, go ahead and subscribe. And then when you get to needing it, you can either do it now where you generate that code, that API key, and you want to save that. Although you can come back. I actually just looked at mine just to verify what it was as well. Okay. So we're going to need that to do the AQI. So I'm just saying do it here in case you run into anything. I want to have you reach out for help if you need it. Okay, so let's circle back around to what I had as for the first bullet point. So one of the things you see this already in the last couple of weeks is we're moving from you actually having a U code to code challenges. And here's what I want you to know. Because I have the effort you put in, right? Because I only have a little bit of code to really grade you on. This is the importance of including comments on what you tried, and it will help me assess your effort, right? Even if you got it right, telling me your approach can be very, very helpful, right? Because remember, the idea on these code challenges, and we definitely see them this week, is that they are a part, where you were doing the U codes before, you're doing a code challenge. So again, you're in comments, what you've tried, how you approached it, help me assess your effort. And some of you have done a great job of giving me that, but just know I may ask you questions if I don't see some of that in there, but do just naturally include them. So now what am I talking about, right? So for this week, I think I've finally gotten it. And again, you're watching content I generated last semester, right? So this one, you're actually in this case, and this is a good prep for what we're about to talk about, is that you're going to actually do a code along with one of my favorite YouTubers. We're actually going to do it for attendance as well. And then I'm going to give you a code challenge based on something, in this case, Color Code, who's the YouTuber we're going to watch, actually kind of sets us up for. I'm going to have you customize it for Fresno, actually, to where you actually can use Fresno, and I give you a code challenge to do that. So then, even if you don't get that code challenge exactly right, telling me what you tried is really good. Okay. But first, oh, sorry. And then we're going to do the user location. And this is where we're using the navigator built into the API to actually get the user location, what I was showing you before. And then we'll have a challenge for that and then the solution for those. And then you can see this pattern as we move forward, which you've already started to see this pattern. Okay. So once we get the user location, then we handle the geolocation to do a fetch. So then we're learning more ways to handle these API calls through this process. Okay, so let me go back here. So that then talks about this. So let's move into the part that you're going to do for this week, which here is the video that you're going to watch. So you're going to first create that week 14. Okay, and then oh yeah, I actually accidentally pulled it up. Okay, so in this case, I love this content. I think it really helps because it actually covers some of the stuff we've already been writing. And that's part of what's going to be your graded part besides doing the actual code along. So in this case, we're going to create a new file called colorcode.js. You're going to change your existing script file and actually just comment out the ones that are for the car. So we'll use the carbon footprint week 14 for just this work. You'll comment out. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and bring up mine so you can see what I mean. So once I set up my week 14, then what I did is I commented out everything else and then I just put that new file. You don't necessarily have to do deferred because in this case, you're just writing code. Matter of fact, notice then I have this file. Now this is ultimately because we end up doing 2 of these. So I do want you to write this code to actually see it work in the browser and because it's going to do some console logs. So we are not necessarily needing output on the browser, but we do need output on the console so that you can see this, okay? And then on the last one he does for this first part, it's going to kind of do some pseudocode at the end that actually doesn't necessarily work, okay? But I do just want you to have the concept. So just know this last one does actually throw an error, so don't worry about that. More importantly, it talks about the idea of why these callbacks can be really hard to manage, which is why we use other things that you're going to learn about next. So once you get through, so this is my point, so you're going to set up that folder, you're going to set up that file, and then you're going to code along, have it loaded in the browser, just like we do live server as well, but looking at the console as you're coding along. Now he's going to have a little bit different environment, but this is worth 60 points. So I will grade, and in this case, I only give you 1 commit to do. Now you do have, I think, 1 commit for the setup. I'll make sure I put that in here as well. So you'll first do 1 commit like we normally do just for the setup. Oh, actually, I have it up here. Okay. Okay, so this is worth 60 points here, right? And then once you get through that code along, okay, where you've actually looked at the browser and you've looked at the code, you've written it, and then one thing I believe I did here is that as I coded the functions and I got them to work, and then I just commented them out and did the next one. And this is really fun to me, the way he's writing this code, just to demonstrate the idea of asynchronous, right? Ordering pizza. I love that. But here's the deal. We've already, and this is what I was saying before, we've already been using some asynchronous code, and I've actually talked about callbacks a little bit. So this is just kind of reviewing some of the things that we've done, and what I want you to do is review the code we've already written. Review the code you just wrote, and review the code in the carbon footprints to find examples of async code because there are some already existing in there. And then you reply, and I say use pre here, and the only reason I'm saying this, I'm not going to make this hard requirement, but when you do pre and you do whatever JavaScript, it actually in the output looks more like JavaScript than when you're just doing regular text. Okay. And it just helps us kind of see. And by the way, there's also ways that you could copy. And if you were copying in, I've seen some folks do this as well. But I'm just giving you a way to distinguish. And the reason I'm doing that is I want you to go find examples in the carbon footprint where we've already written asynchronous code based on what color code's going to show us and based on maybe what you already have gathered based on our carbon footprint progression. Okay, so in your reply, tell us what code you found. And then each student, I believe this should be possible here, should uniquely find some code for this. And then reply to one student who has been given feedback, right? So your post is worth 20, and then your reply is worth 20 in this case. Okay, I know this was a lot to just kind of go through, but hopefully you have the idea of where we're heading, what you need to go ahead and set up, which is that API, having that API key ready when we're going to need it, seeing what we're going to do this week, seeing how we end up using it, ultimately going forward to grab this AQI. And then how we're going to finish our form validation and share out at the end of the semester. All right, have a great week, and I'll talk to you later.